They were just good guys, as far as I knew.
I have to say, honestly, they were happy in Atalissa.
We had never any reason to doubt.
Even though they were adult men, they were boys to us. They were like our boys.
It's just hard to realize how old they were, because they didn't seem that old.
I'm sure some of us, a lot of us maybe had second thoughts that we should have looked into it a little deeper, but again, when you'd ask the boys, how's it going, then none of them ever said, well, this happened to me or this happened to me or whatever.
I never heard them complain. You know, it didn't cross my mind that they were being abused.
Routine can be a dangerous thing for all of us because we stop looking outside of our to-do list for the day. So things that are happening around us, sometimes we miss them because we just weren't looking.
Grab him by the two legs. I go. And then go. They talk right back to me. Get him out the coop, send him in the kill room. I pat him on the belly when I get him on the shackle. I say, okay, Tom, quiet down.
For more than 30 years, Willie Levi belonged to a crew of men working some of the worst jobs at the turkey plant, reaching into crates, grabbing live 40-pound birds, and sending them to be slaughtered. Then they'd eviscerate the carcasses and pull out the guts.
18,000 birds every day. I pull guts. Pull guts out of the bird. I can do it left or right.
Take 3 fingers. You got to pull it this way, and you got to take and pull them all down at the same time, all there.
The turkey neck, they hang it up in the middle of a shackle. The bird comes down, they cut it, big holes. We take our glove and hand, we got to go all the way back in there to pull the whole thing out and lay it over. And it goes down to the inspectors.
Pull liver and cut hearts, all I used to do. From 5 until about 3:30 in the afternoon. One time we did like 28,000 birds one time. The next day we did 27,000 birds. Too damn bloody. I cleaned my face off, and I could wait, and I could go back down and do the same thing all over again.
The men have never publicly spoken at length about their experiences.
It'll ruin your fingers. It'll make your fingers sore, aching, in pain.
You hurt. I go to an emergency room, have it drained 5 times with needles in my arm.
Now, most of them are in their 60s, retired but without any pension, or, in many cases, any savings. Back in the early 1970s, the men were part of an experimental work program in Texas that at the time was seen as progressive. It would also benefit the 2 ranchers behind the program, T.H. Johnson and Kenneth Henry.
little bit amazing when you think about all the boys. You know, we had very few that went through the program that I would call lazy. They didn't mind getting up, you know, after they'd been here a while and kind of knew the routine, get up and go do whatever we had to do. They were getting better and they were taking pride in that. I can do this. For what reason? What reason were they so positive when they came here? They wanted out of that place they were in. They didn't want to be there anymore. They didn't want somebody filling their plate. They didn't want to sit in front of TV all day, every day, and do nothing.
These men, many without family, some as young as 11 years old, had been living in Texas institutions for the developmentally disabled, or state schools, as they were known. Meanwhile, in the Texas town of Goldthwaite, rancher T.H. Johnson saw opportunity. For years, he had benefited from a controversial government arrangement called the Bracero Program, in which Mexicans were allowed to cross the border for farm work. When that program was shut down in 1964, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Henry devised a new program, one that would take in the men from the state schools and train them in job and life skills. This way, the rancher's business, Henry's Turkey Service, would receive cheap labor while also helping the men to avoid being warehoused in an institution.
They could work and they could pay their own way. That's what the program was.
Eventually, Henry's Turkey Service began to subcontract crews of these men to poultry businesses in other states, including a turkey processing plant in Iowa. So, in 1974, a dozen or so men from the ranch in Goldthwaite were trucked north to work in the plant and to live in the town of Atalissa in an old schoolhouse converted into a dormitory.
Big thank you for a delicious meal and enjoyable time. A special thanks for the generous fruit basket.
And she told me that she was in Nebraska with her daughter.
Daughter-in-law.
Sarah gets into those kind of things.
Yeah,
She did.
For 25 years, the ladies of the Atalissa Betterment Committee have gathered to organize holiday parties and bake sales, all in the hope of instilling community pride. But this may be the last meeting for the ABCs.
Yeah, there's not that many of us left, and the younger crowd are busy raising their families and working, and
I
they try, but they don't put in the effort. Originally, Atalissa was a booming town.
Yeah, it had a lot.
We had an opera house, you know, we had banks, we had schools, you know.
But with the expansion of the interstate highways in the 1960s, drivers bypassed Atalissa. One by one, the town's businesses began to close up.
I mean, we're down to a post office, a feed mill, and a fertilizer plant. You know, it was a thriving little town. But from the time I was old enough to remember, we were reduced down to what you see now, and it hasn't changed in 40 years.
Atalissa is a close-knit community, but in 1974, its demographics changed when the town leased an old schoolhouse to Henry's Turkey Service, and dozens of men from Texas moved in.
We just knew that they were contract workers for Lewis Rich Foods.
At first, the town kept its distance from these new neighbors, who'd be seen tending to the flowers on the schoolhouse lawn or walking down the hill to the mini-mart. Gradually, the men came to be known as the Henry's Boys, or just the Boys.
I'm not going to say there was never a problem between some of the townspeople and maybe some of those gentlemen, but they were accepted. They went to church here.
Well, because they had Sunday school at 9:30, and they were the only Sunday school class because we didn't have any little ones.
The men had trouble reciting the Lord's Prayer, so they would hum instead.
They'd line up here by Dwight, that I remember, and they'd line up here, and Dwight would go, okay, you know, he'd cue them and start playing, and they'd just start singing. They were doing the best they could.
And they loved to dance. The thing of it is, if you danced with one of them, you danced with all of them.
We have an Atalissa Day celebration. We always had a parade and a dunk stand at the fair, and those guys would come up and want to throw balls, you know. I don't want to say our game was rigged, but we could trip it whether you hit the little dot or not. So we'd make sure that each one of them got to dunk us at least once.
I remember some of the pictures, they were dressed up as clowns. They loved that, and going to the fair and stuff. And another, they were dressed up as the shepherds and the We Three Kings. And they loved, like, acting, I guess. They all did good playing parts and stuff like that.
Several townspeople remember visiting the schoolhouse in the early days. The men had caretakers, exercise equipment, and even a pool table.
They used to have open houses and things, and I'd been in the building back when it was nice.
I remember going over there for a Christmas party, and they'd come in and they showed us the gym, and I mean, they were proud of that gym.
They knew that the men worked hard in the turkey plant, often taking on the jobs that no one else wanted.
In my mind, that was a good thing because it offered financial support for the mentally challenged people, gave them a place to live. I don't know if they loved it, but they liked going there.
They did have their own money to spend.
Yeah.
But few in Atalissa understood the harsh economics behind the operation, that despite the decades of grueling full-time work, the take-home pay for these men was kept at $65 a month. Or that the caretakers punished the men if they were thought to be not working hard enough. Access to television was denied. Trips to the mini-mart or church were forbidden. For many, the barbecues and Christmas parties early on seemed proof enough that life inside the schoolhouse was all right. The boys never indicated otherwise. An early warning of the trouble inside the bunkhouse came in the winter of 1987, when one of the men, Alfred Busby, apparently tried to run away.
Alfred Busby got mad, and he was telling them what to do, telling them to go to bed. And he said, "No, I'm not going to bed. I'm gonna watch TV like everybody else." So that's what made him mad.
He walked out of the bunkhouse and disappeared.
Way out in the snow.
Local enforcement agencies searched for days but could not locate Alfred Busby. Months passed, winter gave way to the spring thaw, and that is when a local farmer noticed something in his fields.
And they found him dead in the ditch, frozen to death.
The body of Alfred Busby was found less than a half mile from the bunkhouse.
And today we're here to rejoice in and celebrate another Independence Day. With today's signing of the landmark Americans for Disabilities Act, every man, woman, and child with a disability can now pass through once closed doors into a bright new era of equality, independence.
Over the last quarter of the 20th century, much had changed in the nation for people with disability. But not for the Henrys boys in Atalissa. Many of them had come to Iowa in their 20s and were now nearing middle age.
Some of them was 60 and 65. You know, I'm thinking high 30s or mid 40s. So I underestimated their age like by 20 years.
We put a lot of hours in up at that plant, put a lot of hours.
They had little to show for years of hard work.
Now, they didn't really understand that they were working to help pay for in-kind care, and and their clothes and all that stuff.
In a company manual titled The Magic of Simplicity, Henry's Turkey Service outlined the typical financial arrangement for its workers. The company deducted nearly all of their pay to cover lodging and care. This odd but legal arrangement caught the attention of both labor regulators and the Des Moines Register as early as 1979, but nothing changed. By 2000, the men were still taking home just $65 a month, as little as 44 cents an hour, the same amount they had been receiving for the last 25 years. But things were changing around the bunkhouse. In the mid-1990s, a local couple, Randy and Drew Neubauer, were hired to help supervise the men. Like all supervisors inside the schoolhouse, they had no experience or training in caring for people with disability.
They put up the do not enter and private property signs, and when Randy and Drew kind of took over.
When you have a rental property, if it's immaculate and the lawn is well kept, you assume it's that way on the inside.
But one day, Mr. Hepker drove onto the schoolhouse property to do some maintenance work.
And that's when I first noticed that the doors were chain and locked from the outside.
Hang them doggone turkeys, boy. Hang them. Hang them.
The men say that Randy Neubauer harassed them at the plant, withholding bathroom breaks, urging them to work faster on the line.
Then he would back off. They keep adding on to it. They're calling us names. We're lazy bastards. They're telling us that, too.
They said I wasn't doing a good job for them. So they say, get your black butt and get them weights.
Make them lift weights and all that good stuff. All the way around. Walk all the way around that gym.
Walk to supper time.
No good. It went down. It went down good, you know. They started kicking around on people.
The men say that they were often punished by the bunkhouse staff, hit, kicked, forced to stand in place with their hands on a pole. One man was even handcuffed to his bed. At one point, Gene Berg underwent chemotherapy for throat cancer.
Maybe go to work when I was sick, because that cancer in my stomach was in there, and you keep on coming up with pills, and I keep throwing them up in the trash can. That's how bad it was.
In 2007, the turkey plant notified Henry's Turkey Service that its employees had seen Randy Neubauer physically and verbally abusing the men. Neubauer was eventually banned from the plant.
They wouldn't let him go into Lewis Rich anymore because he went in there and was being a complete idiot. And they banned him from going in. So if he acted that way there, it's hard telling how he was acting in there. I know they were definitely afraid of him.
For Dennis Hepker, those padlocked doors of the schoolhouse were troubling. He called Iowa's Department of Human Services.
I said, I just think you need to look into it, that's all. Just like if you saw your neighbor with a real skinny dog in the yard, you'd call and say, maybe you ought to go check that dog out. They probably would do that quicker than these guys did that. And as I look back on it, maybe I should have been a more responsible citizen and looked into it, but
I don't know how they did it, but they'd still always have this big smile on their face, and you never heard them complain.
Never.
they were always clean, they always had nice clothes, and they always seemed happy.
These residents of Atalissa would soon receive a fuller, more disturbing picture of the conditions inside the schoolhouse.
I couldn't believe what I was hearing. 21 men? Where? They were describing to me a report that had been received in a small town called Atalissa. There are 21 residing in a bunkhouse being abused and neglected, and that was the allegation.
By the winter of 2008, the turkey plant had changed hands and was now being operated by West Liberty Foods. Kenneth Henry's partner, T.H. Johnson, had died, and Henry's Turkey Service began winding down its operations in Atalissa.
They were going to get four-wheelers, they were going to live on a big farm, blah, blah, blah.
For years, Henry's Turkey Service had promised the men a nice retirement on the ranch back in Goldthwaite, Texas.
I don't think that ever happened.
No, it wasn't, because they came and took them away.
No, but I think that what they were told was not true, is what I'm thinking.
In fact, that retirement plan had fallen apart. The company had begun sending some of the men to a nursing home in Texas.
I honestly thought that they were all going home. I had no clue.
No,
and
when
I
nobody
think they
knew.
thought so too. I thought
Because
they were all going
didn't
home.
the feds come in the middle of the
They
night
came during the
and
night and
took
got
them away?
A sister of one of the men had called state authorities and the Des Moines Register after discovering that her brother's life savings totaled a mere $80. Local authorities descended upon the schoolhouse in early 2009.
Other than the snow, this is exactly what it was in February of 2009. Same color, same windows. This is a bit misleading because we really couldn't come out this door. It was blocked.
Denise Gonzalez was a supervisor for the Iowa Department of Human Services, but her 20-year career in social work had not prepared her for what she saw inside.
The rodent feces was everywhere. In the kitchen area, in the bedrooms, on the stairs, and the roaches. I mean, you could see them, they would fall off the ceiling. A lot of them. You know, they had like an open bathroom area, and you could see the mold on the walls. Their blankets had, you know, mold in them that you couldn't get out. And the smell, you can't, I'll never forget that smell. You could see their filthy, stained clothing and this. They were arthritic and their hands were like this. Their fingernails were long and embedded with, now I know, turkey blood. It's hard to talk about. There are 21 men here that need to be rescued.
When the state fire marshal declared the schoolhouse to be uninhabitable, all eyes turned to Miss Gonzalez.
Find them shelter, clothing, nutrition. I looked at the men and I said, we're going on vacation. We're going on vacation.
That night, the men were taken to a Super 8 motel in Muscatine, 15 miles away.
I was so glad to get out of there.
Pleased to death to get out of that bunkhouse, you know. I was pleased to death, you know.
An Iowa social worker captured this footage in the days after the rescue.
Pardon? Glad y'all came up here.
I enjoy these people that protect me, and I like them very much, and they take care of me real well.
And who was your social worker?
Yeah, she told me she was swimming with the dolphin and short. And I met her.
Thank you.
Back in Atalissa, residents were gradually discovering the disturbing truth about the conditions inside the schoolhouse.
Oh, God.
Through the newspaper.
Through the newspaper.
Yes. That's how
I never realized there was no windows, that there was no air conditioning, that there was no
I felt
article.
ashamed. I felt angry. All these affiliations, all these government institutes, you know, the sheriff's department, police department, whatever, they all knew that these boys were there. You know,
I think we were all
I was
kind
in
of
shock.
in denial, like
Shock.
somebody's all screwed up.
Yeah.
The bad reputation that we got was the worst. As far as the city was concerned, we had nothing to do with what was going on. I was told by one of them that I had blood on my hands because that we treated them like slaves.
When that all came out, we were just devastated. And then they took them away, and they wouldn't let any of us see them. They wouldn't let anybody go up and visit them.
Waterloo, Iowa, population 68,000, is a 2-hour drive northwest of Atalissa. About a dozen of the men from Henry's Turkey Service live there now.
Instead of age, they've recaptured some youth. They have a lot of life and a lot of things that they want to experience.
I go wherever I want, do whatever I want. It's nobody's business but mine.
Feeling okay to voice their wants, needs, and desires, and it took a while for folks to feel comfortable with that.
Susan Seehas is a program supervisor at Exceptional Persons Incorporated. This nonprofit organization helped the men adjust to living with much greater independence.
Deciding where they wanted to live and that they were going to get to choose whether they continued to work or not, and trying out different types of opportunities for work.
This was a process unlike anything she had experienced.
The records are still incomplete. Some of the men found out that the name that they had been using for a number of years wasn't actually their name. Not having to participate in major group hobbies was very refreshing to a lot of the men. The most predominant thing that we spent time teaching was it's okay to be an individual and like the things you like.
Choice means different things to each man. It might mean riding your John Deere tractor, gardening, relaxing in retirement, or going out on a date.
I like it now. A whole lot better. It's a lot quieter too. No anybody yelling at you or nothing. Do what you want to do and you sleep in. Then get one time for work. If I got this morning, got dressed for work. I had to leave at 9 o'clock. Catch the bus at 5 to 9. Sometimes the bus runs slow, but I was there on time.
It is a much different life than the one that Kenneth Henry says he envisioned for the men on the ranch in Texas. To begin with, construction on the retirement bunkhouse remains half finished.
We didn't make it to the end. We didn't get there. But I know the boys pretty well. Somebody's got to help them. Can't do it on their own. Nothing would be better for me than for those boys to be right here today.
In the spring of 2013, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission tried its case against Henry's Turkey Service in federal court. It charged that the company had forced the men to live in squalor, subjected them to neglect and abuse, and financially exploited them.
Let me say this about the boys. The boys would be truthful. But if one of the boys did make up a story, say, and he told another boy, that other boy would believe it. And I think it got into a little bit of that.
The jury awarded $7.5 million to each of the men. But in keeping with the federal cap on penalties against small businesses, the amount was later reduced to $50,000 each. The men have yet to receive any money.
They missed choice. They missed choice of their life. I don't understand how 30, 40 years this had been occurring. I don't understand that.
In the end, Kenneth Henry blames the mismanagement on his employees, Randy and Drew Neubauer, who declined to be interviewed. But he defends the program's social benefit.
The guy's IQ runs from 35 to 70. These lower IQ boys, you know, the 65 and 70s, they could find places. But when you go below 60, then that's a big step for you, any individual, to decide, I'm going to take this individual, I'm going to try to take care of him, I'm going to train him to do a job. The boys will complain some, but not much. It goes back to the pride thing. They're prideful because these are the ones that nobody wanted. That's why they ended up there for so long.
"5 years after leaving the turkey plant, the men of Waterloo rarely discuss Atalissa.
I won't eat turkeys. I like chicken, not no turkeys. I seen them things last a lifetime with me.
My mom asked me a question on vacation about me. He said, "Son, you want for dinner turkey?" I told her, "I don't want no turkey." I want ham.
In Atalissa, the departure of the men has left a void.
It's lonely.
It's empty.
It's empty.
They were part of the community. You know, when you drove down the main street, Cherry Street, you know, and they're waving, and you don't see that anymore.
Yeah, it's just went downhill.
It's almost like a ghost town, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
That's the word.
Yeah.
The mini-mart the men frequented is now shuttered, and the church is nearly empty on Sundays.
It was like silence. We'd sing our songs and stuff, but it wasn't the same because they'd been here for so long, and you wondered where the tambourine, the guy keeping the beat and stuff was. And
After the men were evacuated from the schoolhouse, the town of Atalissa found itself overrun with reporters.
Yes, we got so sick of them calling it the bunkhouse. You know, and the way they were describing it and just taking pictures of the outside.
Residents are tired of defending themselves. They wish the men the very best, and they plan to knock down the schoolhouse and remove it from the Atalissa landscape.
We're working with a contractor to try and get it demolished. He said actually the building is structurally sound, but we just want it gone.
Do they really? They had an uncanny way of